Imagine yourself in the heart of a dusty plain, armed from head to toe, a heavy helmet muffling your senses, a lorica segmentata creaking with every movement, and a gladius strapped to your side ready for combat. The scorching sun is already shining through the legion's red tunics, and the smell of dry earth mingles with the unmistakable odor of rust and sweat from your comrades. As the phalanxes line up in a quincunx formation, you realize that ancient warfare was not just a choreographed spectacle. It was a test of endurance, discipline, and above all, courage. There are accounts from historians such as Polybius describing how silence before advancing carried more weight than the trumpet to announce battle. From Vegetius, teaching that only veterans occupied the wings to contain flank attacks. And from Tacitus, recording the terror that took hold when soldiers felt the bark of death too close. You may have read about these theories on paper, but you have rarely felt the uncertainty that gnawed at your stomach. Facing the enemy meant laughing at the blazing sun and ignoring the echo of the groans of the wounded at your side. It would be easy to assume that all this tension was swept away at the moment of collision, but the truth of Roman combat goes beyond the first meeting of shields. Throughout this video, we will delve into the psychology of ancient warfare, unravel the workings of the Roman legionary formation, and reveal how, even in the midst of chaos, every step and every order kept discipline under control, until the moment when nothing else mattered but the fight for survival. But before we dive into these stories and curiosities of the Roman Empire, make sure you are already subscribed to our channel and take the opportunity to activate the bell. That way, you will not miss any of our videos full of secrets and surprises about ancient Rome. When the standard flutters and the ground vibrates, under 1,000 hooves, you are no longer watching history, you are fighting in it. The formation of fear, the psychology of the soldier in the field. As soon as dawn broke, before even seeing the enemy troops on the horizon, the legionnaire was already facing an internal duel. Forming the line under the scorching sun was not synonymous with imminent battle. Hours, days, or even weeks passed with both legions standing still, measuring each other in tense silence. Accounts of Scipio's campaign in Ilipa tell how the repetitive ritual, waking up, eating thin bread, lining up and waiting, eroded the spirit, as if each drop of sweat were a second in the countdown to chaos. As the sun rose, hunger set in, and the smell of poorly buried excrement filled the camp. Palpitations, tremors, and cold sweat were symptoms as common as the creaking of weapons. Historians record that many soldiers vomited or even urinated involuntarily as a result of fear and accumulated stress. The mind, more than the body, became a battlefield. Between the psychological scalpel of "will I survive" and the need to maintain posture, each person fought not to succumb to terror. Only the arrival of night brought relief, a brief sigh before the same martyrdom resumed at dawn. But the accumulated anguish soon turned into pressure on generals, forcing them to break the impasse. This was the case in Pharsalus, when Pompey's troops demanded immediate combat and paid dearly for their hasty decision. From that silent anguish, a clamor emerged capable of moving thousands. And it is this impulse that will trigger the next act of this story. Troop pressure. When fear becomes impulse, the endless wait eroded the morale of the legionaries. In the camp at Ilipa in 206 BC, after days under the sun, surrounded by the armies of Carthage, Scipio's troops cried out for action. "Attack now!" This collective cry was born of physical fatigue and accumulated fear. The soldier preferred to face the visible danger than to remain under the anguish of nothing happening. This same impulse tinged the field of Pharsalus in 48 BC with tragedy. Cornered by the appeals of a troop confident in its numbers, Pompey gave in and launched his army into a hasty confrontation. The result was a trap well laid by Caesar and a defeat that forever tarnished his reputation. The lesson is clear. Sometimes, the fear of standing still overcomes the fear of fighting. Between spears and shouts of command, each general fought an internal battle. Should they follow the strategy or heed the clamor of their men? The Roman legionary formation was based on patience, discipline, and control of spirit. Virtues tested to the limit by hunger, thirst, and the sight of the exhausted comrade at their side. This moment of tension reveals how much ancient warfare depended not only on weapons, but on the balance between authority and collective will. Knowing when to resist the urge to attack could be as decisive as the fury of combat itself. This muffled clamor, fueled by fear and the urgency to act, is the trigger that can turn all discipline into chaos. And it all happens before the first step is even taken. The ritual of preparation, morality and discipline before the fight. At dawn, the Roman camp was transformed into a stage of rhythmic sounds. Bugles, drums, the rhythmic tapping of feet on the hard-packed ground. The cohorts were arranged in quincunxes, the famous Roman chess, designed to protect flanks and facilitate maneuvers. Vegetius, in his De Re Militari, teaches that veterans occupied the wings, while the young men formed the center, proving that experience was the most valuable weapon before any sword was drawn. Soon after forming the living board, generals like Paulus Suetonius, Paulinus rode to the front line, delivering concise but powerful speeches. Tacitus records Paulinus's cry at the Battle of Watling Street: "You will see more women than warriors. At the touch of our blade, the enemy will flee." It was not just encouragement, it was an emotional trigger that transformed fear into concentrated fury. Agricola, Tacitus's son-in-law, witnessed how these words reverberated in the hearts of the legionaries, renewing their will to face danger. The centurions followed the same choreography, adjusting helmets, striking each man's shield, and recalling the legion's honor. With this individual touch, each soldier was reminded of his role in the grand scheme of combat. Finally, a pause. The heavy silence before the first step was the ultimate antidote to insecurity. For an instant, the entire field becomes a suppressed sigh, and the next move will decide who retains control of their courage. The advance of the legions, silence, order, and war cries. In the classical treatises, from Vegetius to the Byzantine Strategikon, a silent and measured advance was recommended so that the enemy could hear only the somber rhythm of the Roman footsteps. The idea was to cause terror through the inhuman confidence of thousands of soldiers marching as a single block. There was also the tactical benefit. With silence, the centurion could give orders that were audible even to the men furthest back. However, Polybius's chronicles of the Battle of Zama, 202 BC, and Mark Antony's reports from the east show that in practice, the advance was anything but silent. The creaking of the Lorica segmentati, the clash of the gladius against the scutum, and the unison shout of the comrades formed a veritable war drum. Many men in the third rank shouted words of courage, for their fear was greater. That clamor kept them firm. Imagine yourself trapped in the center of the formation. You can't see the enemy. You can only feel the heat of the bodies around you. Your pulse races, but when you hear the thunder of the hooves of the supporting cavalry and the centurion's final command, your hands close on the hilt of your sword as if finding comfort in the collective noise. This chorus of metal, wind, and united voices reminded each soldier that there was no option but to retreat. It was the moment before the brutal clash, when order finally gave way to the concentrated fury of combat. The ground vibrates with the impact of thousands of shields. But the real earthquake is yet to come. First contact, Pilum throwing and line clash. When the two formations approached to within 20 meters, each legionary raised his Pilum, a 6-foot, 4-pound javelin, ready to throw. In modern tests, the Pilum was shown to have an effective range of up to 65 feet, and the soldier had only about 7 seconds to throw, bend the enemy shield, and draw his gladius before the clash. The pyramidal tip pierced the shield, often bending and preventing its reuse, forcing the enemy to fight with compromised protection. Although the pilum was a hallmark of the Roman infantry, other peoples, Gauls, Germans, Britons, and Iberians also threw javelins during battle to weaken enemy lines. At the Battle of Zama, 202 BC, the synchronized volley of pilums disoriented Carthaginian elephants far from the lines, reducing the animals' shock power to uncontrolled terror. As soon as the javelins were embedded in the ground, the ultimate test began. The gladius was unsheathed, and the clash transformed into a whirlwind of shields, short blades, and cries of effort. Each step forward required sheer willpower. A hand-to-hand battle where every inch gained meant surviving one more second. Have you ever wondered how this decisive moment shaped the destiny of entire empires? Leave your like and strengthen a legion of curious people. When the shafts cut through the air and cracked against the shield, the entire field felt the impact. That's when true chaos arose. The stagnation stage, more shields than swords. When the formations finally clash, what we see is not a bloody chaos, but a wall of interlocking shields. Soldiers barely raise their gladius. The priority is to raise the scutum and protect their embodies. Studies of dozens of battles indicate that before each line gives way, less than 5% of the combatants fall. Few dare expose their own flesh to the enemy blade. In this tense blockade, each centurion becomes the master of a war of nerves. Short commands cut through the air, advance, steady, while auxiliary troops push from behind to reinforce those on impact. Dust rises, the wind dulls the senses, and vision is reduced to shield-to-shield contact. It is there, in this collective push, that discipline proves as lethal as steel. Those who hesitate weaken the entire formation. But the immobility does not last. There comes a sudden moment when someone pushes an extra inch, slips a shield, or screams in pain. This small failure is a psychological breach, the spark that makes the wall crumble. In this impasse, the courage to break the silence is worth more than 1,000 stabs. And when that spark appears, the dynamic changes in a fraction of a second, transforming a static position into a roar of advance. It is in this contained breath, before the spark of the break, that the fate of thousands is etched in a single step forward. Breaking the moral, how the courage of a few changed everything. In 168 BC, at the Battle of Pydna, a simple signifer, the standard bearer of the cohort, made a decision that would change the course of the battle. Seeing the Macedonian phalangites wavering, he threw his standard into the enemy lines, challenging them to retrieve it. The sight of that sacred symbol out of Roman hands fired the spirit of the legionaries, who advanced with renewed fury. Within moments, the Macedonian wall crumbled, and the Roman victory was sealed. This episode epitomizes the psychology of Roman combat. Warfare was not just about physical strength, but also about mental dominance. While complex formations were locked in a stalemate, a single act of bravery, a single act of courage, was enough to create a domino effect. The enemy's confidence was crumbling, and the seemingly timid attack turned into a relentless onslaught. It wasn't just at Pydna. In Caesar's campaigns, accounts tell of how the fall of a standard or the enthusiastic shout of a centurion at a critical point demoralized the opposing troops, paving the way for decisive advances. These small sparks of courage concentrated all the accumulated tension, converting the fear of fighting into the determination to win. A standard raised in silence, a cry piercing the fear. And, in an instant, The hearts of thousands exchange hesitation for impetus. The terror of escape, when victory becomes massacre. While the line held out, casualties were usually below 5%, a tense draw of life and death. But all it took was a breakdown in cohesion for everything to change. When the formation opened up, the Roman soldier was given free rein to pursue the enemy in disarray. It was the beginning of a massacre. Losses that reached 60% among the defeated, as recorded in sources from several ancient campaigns. In practice, the escape turned into a relentless hunt. Exhausted men, heavily armored and thirsty for blood, fell under blows from gladiuses and javelins thrown by the rear ranks. Dust rose mixed with blood, and the cry of "Flee!" became a death sentence. At Zama, after disorienting the elephants, the Romans left the Carthaginians without even the organization to form a second line of defense. Panic spread like wildfire. For those who won, adrenaline quickly gave way to fatigue and grief. Seeing their comrades fall in a pursuit that bordered on revenge left deep scars. It was the paradox of Roman combat, relentless discipline during the clash and limitless brutality in the pursuit. In the wake of bodies and dust, victory reveals its darkest face. And the only question left is, what makes some resist while so many flee? The three rules of combat: casualties, mobility, and relays. Analyzing accounts of dozens of Roman battles, we notice three patterns that were almost always repeated. The first rule is that of moderate casualties. During the initial clash, very few soldiers fell, usually less than 5% of the force. This statistic deviates from the image of continuous carnage. It reflected the natural fear of exposing one's body to direct attack, holding the line firm until a breach appeared. The second rule is that of constant mobility. In Pharsalus, Caesar notes that his troops, surprised by the lack of enemy attack, stopped, reorganized themselves, and advanced again with Pilum still in hand. In other campaigns, armies were pushed back for up to a kilometer before counterattacking. This back and forth prevented extreme fatigue in a section of the legion and forced the enemy to readjust its strategy with each retreat or advance. The third rule is the rotation of fighters. Without the signal of a whistle, veterans and youngsters would switch positions almost organically. Those who fought in the front, when feeling the weight of the effort, would retreat to the center, being covered by the fresher ones. This dynamic allowed each man to maintain about 10-12 minutes of intense combat before gaining breath, ensuring energy to withstand hours or even days of confrontation. 3 solid laws, 1 single secret. Now it remains to discover the theory that wove together this unbeatable system. The dynamic standoff theory and the shocking conclusion. The dynamic standoff theory brings together everything we have seen. Instead of a frozen clash, the Roman and enemy lines flowed like tides of metal, advancing and retreating in a coordinated fashion. Each advance generated pressure, each retreat reorganization. This tactical dance allowed for exploiting gaps without overexposing the combatants, maintaining balance until one side lost its composure. By this pattern, we understand 3 paradoxes. Low casualties during combat. No one risked being turned away. High mobility, pushing and retreating kept the troops fresh. And informal rotation. Veterans replaced juniors when they ran out of steam. Together, these laws explain how legions could hold out for hours, even days, without immediate collapse. When the formation finally gave way, psychological panic spread and discipline disappeared, resulting in the carnage of the pursuit. This model corrects the exaggerated view of non-stop violence. Roman combat was a game of patience, nerves of steel, and psychological strategy, where the control of fear decided each victory. Now, whenever you watch an ancient battle scene, remember this dynamic of advance and retreat, and see history in a whole new light. By understanding this dance of advance and retreat, you see Roman warfare through the eyes of someone who was on the front lines. If you enjoyed this trip through time and want more fascinating stories, subscribe to the channel, like it, and share this video with your friends. This way, you help us continue to bring you quality historical content. Thank you very much for watching, and we'll see you in the next video about ancient Rome and its great empire.